First off, good morning to all of our colleagues here. We're all friends here, but some of us here are brothers and sisters because we struggle together. We risk our lives, we dedicate our time, and we have a commitment to transform society into one that is truly free and just. So we have a good group of brothers and sisters here, so I'm very glad to be sharing this time with you. I'm going to speak very briefly as I only have time to give a general perspective of where we are in terms of teacher struggles in Puerto Rico. So I have given a bit of a diagram here to show a more holistic picture so that we can understand what are some of the proposals that are being worked on in the island of Puerto Rico or Borinquen. And firstly, you're going to see this image. This is not something that is new for all of you because you know that Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. All federal laws of the United States are applied to Puerto Rico, and this is a challenge, but it also favors links between the struggles of American and Puerto Rican struggles. And in the center of the image, you're going to find the letters that represent No Child Left Behind. And it's very important to emphasize in this image that the neoliberal model of education in the United States has been governed by this law, which is the seventh revision of the elementary education law in the United States. And this law has two broader purposes which cannot be separated. On the one hand, on your left, you can see that No Child Left Behind is a business for profit. It's part of that neoliberal model, but we have to be conscious of the fact that in the United States, there is a new industry that has been created, which is the industry of educational failure, which is a very profitable business. So No Child Left Behind is not just about money. It is also about social control. So on the other side, we're going to see that in the sphere of social control, we're talking about abandoning the concept of education and entering into the concept of instruction in this framework of standardization. Obviously, this mechanism of social control has two parts in the diagram. One is directed towards the actual substance of education, the standardized substance of education, and this is the deterioration of everything that is the educational process, and it establishes a series of requirements according to the interests of the state and social control. And on the other side, something that's often ignored is the No Child Left Behind legislation has the purpose of establishing the dictatorship within the classroom. This is something that's very important because, as we're going to see in the diagram as well, it implies the intensification of the exploitation of the teacher as part of these changes. In the particular case of this diagram, you're going to see in the end there is a circle in green, which is in the United States. Unlike Puerto Rico, we actually stopped charter schools. We don't have charter schools in Puerto Rico. And all of these mechanisms are authorized by the profit motive. So we're going to go to the next image now. So basically, how has this reality evolved? Well, you know that in the year 2014, federal law establishes No Child Left Behind, that 100% of students have to be proficient. Obviously, this is impossible, and that there's going to be some penalties of funding cuts if that 100% proficiency of students isn't reached by 2014. Obviously, this industry of educational failure is going to allow for these budget cuts, obviously, because that's the business. So Then there's an investment that's known in the United States as waivers. In Puerto Rico, there was a waiver in 2011, another in 2013, and finally in 2014. 1 second. Okay, so we're here. These waivers, what they simply say, it's very simple. They say that for the bus, there's no flexibility. For example, we are going to allow for the destruction of the education system and more liberty for the authorities and for the educational workers. What it means is less labor rights and the destruction of the education system as part of the education system in order to impose a system of instruction. In Puerto Rico, although there is a change in federal law, the waivers, so these flexibilization plans are what still dominate this context. So we're going to the next image now. I want to concentrate now on in the slide before we were talking about social control and the increase of the level of exploitation of workers, of teachers, of increasing exploitation of teachers. In the case of Puerto Rico, I have this image because it's something that's very important for us to understand what's going on, is that the education workers, the majority are women. The majority of those are single mothers who are supporting their family, and these colleagues, they receive a brutal pressure by their bosses. So there are no charter schools, but it's the rhythm of work, that you have to work more at home, that your computer has you working 24 hours a day, more administrative tasks, more students per classroom, all of the social crises that arrive at your classroom. And in the end, there's no rest. You're constantly working for the school. And so you have to add to this a new planning system so that you're not planning your class, but you're, quote-unquote, proving your work as a teacher. And this requires many work hours. So we have to add on to this that there's a new system of evaluating teachers, like what's going on in Mexico. This is not a coincidence. It's part of the plan. And this is a new evaluation system that's absolutely punitive and requires brutal efforts from the part of teachers, and which almost guarantees their failure according to the requirements of this evaluation. This brings us to a phenomenon which we cannot ignore, that is, in Puerto Rico, a very important sector of the teachers movement is starting to hate giving classes. They don't like school. They want to get out of there as fast as they can. And of course, this makes sense because this dictatorship of the bosses, which is changing a creative labor into an impressive labor that creates a very difficult situation within labor organizing that is going on the island, and later on we can expand on that. Meanwhile, we're linking together different processes. We've already talked about No Child Left Behind and the waivers, and now there is this dictatorship within being imposed on teachers, which is creating a new ideology and new feelings within the teacher sector, but there are also two large processes. In the lower left side, you can see that that all of this process is a system of social control, which is absolutely strategic and necessary for the dominant class in midst of a capitalism which is suffering a profound crisis, and they are aware that teachers work with ideology, and ideology is a fundamental part of preserving the system and maintaining it. And on the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see another process, because in our colonial context, we see the bankruptcy of the extractive model in Puerto Rico, which is producing the mass exodus of Puerto Ricans from the island towards the United States, and it also has an impact on the student population and an impact on social organizations, many of whom also leave the island. So moving now towards the end, we have to work on what are our responses to these processes. This image centers on two aspects. The first circle, and what's on the lower left-hand side, refers to that all of this attack has a fundamental ideological component, but we are very good at criticizing what is capitalism and what is the ideology of capitalism, neoliberalism, and other words. But we don't often talk about what is the ideology of the working class. And the ideology of the working class has only one name, which is socialism. And when we are talking about responses to this phenomenon, if we don't just want to be on the defensive, then we have to talk about how we're going to re-articulate a systematic ideological working class response towards the systemic and brutal attack against us. In this case, in the Puerto Rican context, which is what is on the right-hand side, it's basically that we cannot just focus on the union organizing aspect, because our Mexican counterparts give us an awesome example that we need to organize students, we need to organize parents, but that organizing isn't enough, because we need to fight, because we're organizing ourselves for what? And that struggle needs to have a real ideological component, obviously not being dogmatic, but something that grows from the grassroots, but which can summarize that this attack that we're facing in Puerto Rico is part of a more global assault on rights, and that we need to move into an offensive manner, and an offensive strategy requires an ideological component, and one that we need to work on both in the classrooms and the streets.